What's up, Clench Crew? Brandon Falkenberg here, co-founder Clench Fitness. Today we are going to talk about caring for your bands and making them last as long as possible. We sell some of the most premium resistance bands on the market. What makes them premium is the fact that they are layered and that they are using 100% natural latex material. There's no fillers, there's no junk material in there other than latex, and it's using bonded layers. And the beauty of having layers in a band is so that if you were to get a cut or a nick in this band over time and stretch it, the cut will not propagate through the layers. That's what makes a layered band so much better than a molded band, which means that they're molded in one solid piece. If you cut a molded band, that crack propagates right through and the band snaps. So moving on beyond that, the three biggest causes for failures to bands are sharp edges, overstretching, and abrasive surfaces. So let's take a little deeper dive into each one of these topics, and I can explain a little bit more as to what each one of these means and how to avoid it. The first one is sharp edges. Obviously it makes perfect sense. Don't put a soft rubber band in contact with any sharp edges. That's gonna slice your band. It's just like playing with a rubber band in school. You cut it and it's gonna snap. So you wanna do everything you can to avoid cutting these bands. The best thing that we found to anchor on is a large round tube. Like for instance, the end of a barbell. It's a 2-inch diameter tube. You can hook your band on it. It's nice and smooth, and you're not gonna have any issues with the band stretching and contracting across that surface. That's also why we designed the anchor strap the way we did. We use a piece of 1.25-inch diameter tube that you're not gonna have issues with. Nice smooth surface, band feels good and it's anchored. And when you stretch it and contract it, there's nothing going on here to cause this band to bind up. The next most common thing that people use is, post-shaped objects, square tubing on squat racks. All that stuff is okay as long as the surface is smooth and there's no sharp or jagged surfaces on there that are going to cut your bands up. Another common thing that you see people using are these wall anchor hooks, and they commonly use a smaller rod to anchor your bands to, and they're also okay, but you want to make sure that you can find one with the largest diameter rod on there as possible. This is a 3/8 diameter rod, which is, I would say, cutting it close to the minimum end, but we've been testing these for a while and they don't have any problems. You just got to make sure that, again, the surface is smooth and it's a nice continuous radius on it. There's no sharp corners or anything that are going to dig into the band. So that pretty much covers it for the anchoring surfaces. Another thing I just wanted to quick touch on was the clench band handle, and it does have some very tight radius surfaces on it, but if you use it properly, it should not damage your bands. And using it properly means using each of the hooks for the appropriate width bands. So this center hook is designed for bands up to 1 inch wide. This is a 13/16 inch wide band, which is the widest band we sell under 1 inch. And you can see that when you stick it in here, it fits in nice and tight. It's nice and snug. But there's still a little bit of room for this band to move around in here once you're doing exercise. You can see that the band will kind of find its home. It's not getting too badly deformed, and as long as you don't overstretch it, we'll be okay in that. Here's something that's not okay. Trying to stick a band that's wider than 1 inch in this center hook and using it. I mean, you can clearly see that we're starting to deform the band. It doesn't like to stay in this configuration, and as soon as you start loading it up, you're going to have all sorts of tension and stress concentration going into different areas of that band. That's why we designed the outer hooks onto the band handle. Outer hooks are awesome for big bands. Hook it right in, and you go to town. It spreads the load out across 2 hooks, nice flat surfaces for it to ride on, and you can stack multiple bands in here. And you can also go up to bands up to 1 3/4 inches wide. So for instance, if we were to grab one of our green bands, it will fit in here. It starts to get a little tighter of a bend radius in here, and you can see that the band is kind of deforming to the hooks. That's why this is about the maximum size band that you want to go with. Another thing that we're seeing people doing commonly is trying to put big bands like over top of these hooks for some reason. It's just not the way to do it, guys. For instance, if you were to put tension on this thing, you can see how that band is just the corners are starting to dig into that band, that's going to rough your band up and it's going to destroy it over time. So just don't do it. Use the outer hooks or use the end of the handle, which is also another nice area, a lot of smooth contoured surface to hold your band, and you can still put some heavy bands on here and get some workout stuff. The next topic I want to go over is overstretching. Bands are designed to be stretched, but they have a limit to how far you can actually stretch them. And the typical rule of thumb that we go with for our bands is do not stretch to more than 2 times the relaxed length. So what does that mean? A typical band is 41 inches long, which is 82 inches. So you can go from, this is about 1 time its length relaxed. That's what this looks like 2 times. If you go beyond that, you are now going to be degrading the band and permanently deforming it. You'll be overstretching it and stretching it out, and that's where damage starts to occur. The biggest thing that we see for overstretching is in a case where you have a shorter band. So say you're going to do a deadlift. So now your relaxed length, you just cut that in half. It's now 20 inches or less. And if you basically stretch it now up, that's almost 2 times this relaxed length. And a lot of people like to go beyond that, and that's where you're going to hit into that plastic deformation range where you'll hit that limit, and then all of a sudden the band's going to want to start pulling all of its slack out of here and grinding across these surfaces. That's where you're going to start cutting into your band. So you want to make sure that when you're anchoring your bands, you leave yourself enough slack that you don't enter that range of overstretching. Well, how do I get a heavier deadlift then? Go with heavier bands or stack multiple bands together, but just don't overstretch them. Now we're talking about abrasive surfaces and grinding the bands. Picture a piece of sandpaper going across a surface. It's going to be removing that material, grinding away the band. And we most often see this in cases where someone's stepping on the band in a rough surface condition. If you're ever going to be standing on your bands in a condition where the surface might be rough, maybe try it, do a couple reps, and make sure that it's not damaging your bands. The most common thing that happens is when somebody is standing on their bands, for instance, and say you're doing like some jump squats or stuff like that, you create relative motion between your surface and the band. So you're basically acting like a piece of sandpaper on this band. And another common instance where you see that relative motion is in a condition where you're overstretching the band. So if you're going to take this band and start stretching it, you can see that the band gets narrower and narrower because you're stretching it out, and there comes a point in time where it'll hit that limit, which feels like just about right here. You can feel that it just kind of like bottoms out, and then it's going to start trying to pull more material out from underneath of your shoe or whatever surface you have it sandwiched between, and then it's going to be doing that same sandpaper motion, and then you're also combining it with an overstretching condition. So that's where you'll start seeing those jagged cuts and tears in your band, is when you overstretch it and try to pull it out from between 2 surfaces. So do your best to avoid that at all times. In conclusion, we've covered the 3 common band failure mechanisms or failure modes. The first one, sharp edges. Do not let your bands come into contact with sharp edges, and they will last much longer. Over time, you might see some little nicks and cuts in the very corners or edges of your bands. As long as that stuff isn't propagating and moving inwards, that's just common wear and tear on your bands. But as soon as you start seeing bigger cuts, that's very indicative that it came into contact with some kind of a sharp edge, okay? So number 1, avoid sharp edges. Number 2, avoid overstretching your bands. What is overstretching? Going beyond 2 times the relaxed length. It's not always 41 inches. If you're standing on the band, it could be much less, or if you're doing a chest press or anything, that relaxed length does decrease, and you begin localized overstretching of the band. So avoid that. Then the last one, number 3, is abrasive surfaces and grinding. Do not use your band like a piece of sandpaper. That's all it is. Avoid that relative motion, avoid overstretching while you're standing on a band or sandwiching a band between 2 surfaces for an anchor point. If you have any questions, or if you're wondering, is this a good situation, is this not, reach out to us. Send us a picture on Facebook or Instagram or a little video, say, is this okay? Like, we want to help you to make these things last as long as possible. Thanks for watching, and if you have any questions, be sure to leave them in the comments or reach out to us like I said before.